All right, good morning, Doug. Today we're going to do some more questions.
Good.
Questions are fun.
They are. I have more questions than answers myself, but let's do what we can.
Yeah, actually, let me start off first by talking about something an idea we came up with yesterday. So as some of our regular viewers or readers of your books may know, that there's this concept called the Paladin network, where essentially it's a information service, a boots on the ground information service to help us understand what's actually happening in the world, because who knows what to believe about anything anywhere now. So one of the thoughts that we had yesterday was that the COVID-19 restrictions in different cities and states are very difficult to determine how serious they are. I mean, meaning even if there is a mask mandate, are people paying attention to it or not? In some places, and they're not. And I know there are certain cities in Florida where, for instance, the kids are masked, and others where there's not. So so the idea is that we could essentially collect boots on the ground information from our viewers who are in different locations, put all that information into a sort of an intelligence service, and make that available as a paid product, distribute the proceeds of that to the contributors to the information. And this is the basis, essentially, of the Paladin network as well. So anyway, I'm fleshing the idea out more, but if you're interested in contributing to this, there will be a link in the description of this video with a simple form that'll tell us essentially where you are geographically. And if you're interested in participating in it, if you fill out that form, I'll get a better sense of the total coverage we have globally. And if it's enough, then I think there's something definitely we can do with it. And so where we're at right now, we have, 40 plus people that have already said that they're interested in contributing, and it's pretty diverse already. We have Poland and Portugal and Vietnam, Indonesia, Ireland, Canada, some from California, Medellin, Colombia, Hong Kong, Istanbul. So it shows a lot of potential.
I agree. And the idea of this Paladin token, we explain this in reasonable detail in the last novel, Assassin, and how the Paladin token evolves into something much bigger than simply a verifiable information exchange. And as a cryptocurrency, which we're thinking of doing a white paper and turning it out there, it's how two of our characters, Miley and Rainbow, probably become billionaires, which is pretty good for teenage girls.
Pretty good, yeah.
So, I think this thing might have some legs in lots of ways other than just enriching the people that are involved in it.
Exactly. And I think if you'd like to contribute to this sort of beta test we're doing on just a limited set of data, COVID-19 restrictions in specific geographic areas that you have personal knowledge of, then go and fill out this form. Also, if you happen to be a full stack developer or a blockchain developer that's worked with smart contracts, I'd love to hear from you, and maybe there's a way we can work together building this thing out. So in any case, let's get to some of these questions. So Doug, hypothetically, I don't know if we've had this one before, but maybe we have answered this. Hypothetically, if you were in the U.S. and you knew, but no one else knew, that in 7 days the U.S. dollar would become worthless and that the borders would be shut to all people trying to leave, what actions would you take? Would you ride it out in the Chesapeake Bay in your place in Virginia, or somewhere else?
I'd get out of Dodge.
You did.
I have, because when that type of thing happens in a country, you don't want to stick around if you're a known enemy of the state. And
yes.
so, no, I would leave. And of course, when things get that dicey, you want to have sufficient assets out before you, because by the time that happens, it's already going to be too late to move substantial assets, probably. Might be too late to move yourself. So that's the answer.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And are there any podcasts or newsletters that you regularly visit or read?
Well, I always enjoy reading our friend Rick Mayberry's letter. I love listening to Jeff Berwick's podcasts
with Lucy.
Lucy.
They're amazing.
It's actually quite amusing.
Yeah, they really are.
And what else?
Well, I mean, obviously the people we've had on the show before, like
Yeah.
Paul Rosenberg.
Yeah,
You know,
his
I
stuff
mean,
is always good.
yeah, and I think Mark Faber.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, anyone who's been on the podcast, we're readers of. That's
Yeah,
why we know
Faber's
them.
stuff is very has a lot of intellectual depth, and it's a great learning experience. So, yeah, absolutely.
I like George Gammon as his podcast. I think he's really great. I know you've been on it several times. You know George. I think he's done a tremendous job at like educating people on the monetary system. And he's done a great job. So I like his stuff. Chris McIntosh, his newsletter is fantastic.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I'd say it's. If you want to diversify, if you have a good-sized stock portfolio and you want to diversify, it's almost indispensable. It's unique.
It's unique. Yeah, I agree. Anything else come to mind off the top of your head?
Just off the top of my head.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Gerald Salente, obviously, anybody we've had on the podcast are people that we read, so that's important to know.
Yeah, Gerald is always very psychologically reinforcing.
He is. He makes you your spine a little stronger, I think, by just listening to him. Like I could do more.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good enough. All right. So let's see. Next question. Interesting. This guy, James from the UK, says, I've written a program that has contacted 60,000 schools in the UK, USA, Canada, and Australia in the past few weeks. I gave them verifiable information about the dangers of vaccinating children with this mRNA virus, or vaccine. Oops, Freudian slip. As I'm against it for adults, but children was the last straw for him. And he said it's had quite an impact for very little effort, and it's thrown, he says, a spanner in the works for sure. Many schools and other organizations have started to question the COVID hysteria narrative more, but the UK government still wants to try and push ahead, which is to be expected. Anyway, his question goes on a little bit more. He said, my question is, do you think it's tactful to sometimes operate within the system and then point out the fact that it is not the government that helped you be successful, but someone, but someone who actually, you're someone who actually believes the government is pointless. So I think he says so we talk about parallel societies operating outside of the system, but stepping into the system essentially to help wake people up, essentially.
Well, I guess it depends on your personality and your own psychological profile. I couldn't do it if through some miracle I was elected to the Senate or the Congress.
Would that be a miracle or would that be a curse?
Oh, it'd be horrible. I'd be surrounded by all these horrible people, not just the other politicians, but all their staffers who are even generally worse than the politicians themselves. So I couldn't do it personally, but somebody else might be able to, and Ron Paul.
Yeah.
He did some good, but none of the other swamp creatures listened to him.
No.
So.
But what this guy is doing specifically is pretty impressive. I mean, it sounds like you might be a full stack developer if you've built a program that does this, by the way, and maybe you should reach out to talk about the Paladin network. But I think this is an interesting guerrilla effort, essentially, if it's an information war, a war for people's minds, which I think this really is, and he's contacting the schools directly through this program he's written and giving them information that's got to leave them in doubt, maybe. Because maybe they're not even hearing the other side.
It's true. Well, I guess I certainly approve of it because there are many paths up the mountain. And this is certainly one that should be taken by people that are in a position to do so.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's really great. Okay, so next is something from Warren in Serbia. He says, you are often asked about how to bring money in through labor and investments. How can the things that money tends to chase, do you see the corporate media as playing the dominant role in influencing how people use their money to the detriment of people's own health? And I guess what he's saying here is that, we talk about how to make money through business and jobs and, and investing, but how much of what people are actually consuming or spending that money on is sort of part of a, manipulation of the media, and
You mean buying things like Xanax and Zoloft and
or
Prozac.
Rolexes and Lexuses.
Right. Not to mention McDonald's and
Exactly. Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola. Yeah, of course.
But do you never like fallen into any of that? Because I know like you like even great wines, you're like wine, all wine's fine for me, and you
Yeah.
like good wine, of course, but you don't care.
Yeah, I mean, look, some wines taste better to me than others. I can tell the difference most of the time, but most of the time it's marketing.
It is.
It really is.
And you've never fallen victim to the watches and all
No,
that stuff. Instead,
no.
but you filled your homes with art and like things that had interest for you for for decades. So how have you avoided that? I guess avoided that mass consumption, brainwashing.
I've always tried to be kind of an outsider.
You've always naturally been an outsider,
Tell
I
you the
think.
truth, yeah. And skeptical. It's a question of critical thinking. And what do you believe that you're being told by the smiling, blow-dried person on the television that's hyping something? I mean, having always been interested in cars, I always thought that after I found out how they worked, the things that they said about them had nothing to do with how they actually operated and how much fun they were to drive or anything like that. Anyway, listen, part of this is genetic, where people are always trying to impress the other chimpanzees with how much stuff they have,
It's kind of the gamma rat thing, though, isn't it? In a way, we've talked about that before.
It is the gamma rat thing, exactly. And for those who might not have heard that edition, we probably mentioned it a couple of
Times,
them.
but it's been a while.
Yeah, so you've got alpha rats. Everybody knows who they are. They're the ones that take control, boss things around, gets through force of character or brute force, get the best mates and, the most possessions and so forth. Okay, everybody knows that. And then you got the beta rats, the ones that do what they're told and take the leavings from the alpha rats. Okay, that's the way society has organized the patricians and the plebeians, the rich guys, the poor guys. Okay, that's fine. But experiments have shown that there was actually a third type of rat that they didn't really expect, and this is the gamma rat. And the gamma rats also cut out the best mates and the best possessions and pretty much get what they want. But the difference is, unlike the alpha rats, they don't beat up the beta rats. They're kind of get along, go along libertarian rats. So, and there were a very small proportion of the rats tested by the scientists here. And you can see it in human society. And I prefer hanging out with gamma rats.
Definitely.
Other gamma rats, anyway.
I agree. Okay. Next question from Jim in Vietnam. He says, do you think a war in Taiwan is likely?
It would be stupid on the part of Xi Jinping, in my opinion, because things are going in his direction right now. What is there to gain? What is there to gain from a war where you're going to destroy a lot of the capital in Taiwan? You're going to destroy the system that's made it successful. So it's just an ego thing if he wants to have a war with... and it's really dangerous. These things can spin out of control.
Yeah.
I mean, especially with the government in Washington the way it is, the Americans are quite capable of doing something, of overreacting and doing something really stupid. I mean...
Yeah, but there's been some things that I saw in the news this week that are kind of interesting. There's a submarine that hit some strange object, in the South China Sea, international waters, but in the South China Sea. So it ran into something, injuring a dozen Navy personnel.
What kind of an object do you recall?
They didn't say. They don't know what it was. But I mean, now they've run into stuff before. This isn't going to be the first time they hit basically a underwater mountain in 2005. So it's like, but still, that's kind of interesting. And then it came out that there are some special forces that are actually in Taiwan training, and which is a violation of the sort of understanding between China and the U.S. So that came out this week as well, and China's very upset about that. So I wonder. I mean, there are things that are out there, but
Well,
you're right. It would be
and of course,
stupid.
there were these reports of the Chinese sending scores of aircraft
Right.
into Taiwanese space.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the Taiwanese going to do if the Chinese keep encroaching, more planes closer in, more planes closer in? At what point are they going to draw the line?
Yeah. But I mean, for Taiwan, Taiwan would be the biggest loser in all this, no matter what. It seems to
Yeah,
me.
no question, they would be
Yeah.
the biggest loser, but it could spin way out of control. So,
The thing is, the Chinese strategy is, back to your point, I think, is the Chinese strategy is working. They've been playing a long game and it's working.
Yeah.
So it would seem foolish for them to escalate.
yeah, because if they stopped exporting, mainly to the U.S., but also to the rest of the world for any reason, there goes their industrial empire, massive unemployment, their banks that have made loans would fail. I mean, it's very dangerous for them to upset the current game the way it's being played. Although, it would appear that all their banks have made huge malinvestments and bad loans supporting companies that shouldn't be supported. So they're going to have an economic crash at some point. Expanding, you can't deny their expansion's been spectacular. I mean, there's been nothing like it in world history, quite frankly. But there have been huge malinvestments that have to have been made. I mean, those cities in the middle of nowhere, it's in bridges to nowhere. I mean, I don't know why those things were really built, but, Evergrande is perhaps the first real straw in the wind that
Right.
this is all coming unglued. So, if I was Xi, I would say, well, steady as it goes, don't rock the boat too much, but I recognize that I'm sitting on a potential time bomb just within the country.
Well, I mean, demographic time bomb, if nothing else,
That's
which
right.
basically will cause an economic decline. It's going to cause real estate prices ultimately to go down. It's going to, its demand is just going to shrink substantially.
When you have a country of old people consume differently and work, it's not like having active young people that want to become rich.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening to China. So,
Right. Okay. So if you were to bet that there's a conflict between over Taiwan in the next 12 months, the odds of that in your mind are
of it happening?
yeah.
Wow. It's one of the problems. Well, things always change. I mean, who was that Harvard professor a few years ago that wrote he wrote a book? Was the book called Thucydides' Dilemma, where the failing old power thinks in terms of attacking the rising new power before they get too big to attack. So the danger could come not only from the Chinese.
From us.
It could come from us. Exactly.
Yeah. So did you say a 10% possibility? 5% possibility?
Well, I think war is a constant of being a human. It just is. Well, especially when we're dealing with governments which are organized on force and coercion, which always have the worst kind of human running them. Because who else would want to run a coercive institution except the worst, most dangerous type of person? So yeah, there's a real danger of it. But I'd hate to put percentage odds on it. And anyway, as I've said before, World War III, I think, is not going to have too much to do with the kind of junk they're playing with now, F-35s and submarines and aircraft carriers and the rest of it. It's going to be a cyber war and a biological war.
And in that respect, it's possible it's happening already.
It very well may be.
Yeah.
That's right. It could be that this current so-called pandemic is kind of a let's see what happens if we do this.
An opening salvo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What are Doug's thoughts on Australia, and does he think such authoritarian measures are coming to the U.S.?
Yeah, I think so. It's happened to Australia, it's happened to New Zealand, it's happening to Canada. But unfortunately, and hopefully what you talked about at the very beginning of this will help solve this problem, how can you really trust the reporting?
Right.
Because even in Australia, I understand, but I don't know, I'm not in Australia now, that it's mainly the,
It's on the east.
it's in the east.
So like
and,
Perth is open from what I understand.
yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
But I don't know. I mean, that's what I...
Right, exactly. And if we get some sporadic report from some marginally reliable news source tomorrow, well, that's all we hear about it. Because as the news cycle drives on, then you wonder whatever happened to,
Right.
So
that's why it's so critical to have actual boots on the ground intelligence. I mean, it's absolutely critical, and that's why you traveled so much over the course of your life, is just really know what was actually going on in places. But I mean, if we can make this work with our viewers and build a network around it, I think we could actually, we could have a much better sense of what's actually happening.
yes, it can be, and it can be fun, and it can be profitable. So we'd kind of be covering all the bases.
Exactly. All right. Let's see. We already covered that one, so I'm going to skip forward a little bit to some of the... Sorry, this middle chunk we'd already done, so I'm trying to get to the end here. Well, here's just a compliment from somebody. He says, since discovering this podcast a few months ago, I have to say that I find the conversations to be extremely intellectually stimulating. It has caused me to rethink a lot of my views. I identified as a conservative in the past, but I have to say I'm currently libertarian and wouldn't be surprised to be a full ANCAP in a few years, or maybe even a few months. I just wanted to say thank you both for doing this.
Well, that is really gratifying to hear something like that. And it does happen rarely because, like in Argentina, there's a good friend of mine, Jorge Truco, who's a hunting and fishing guide in San Martin de los Andes, in the far south in Patagonia. And Jorge and I always used to go out to dinner and, have conversations and just hang out. And we'd talk philosophy and we'd talk politics. And Jorge he was a morally sound guy, but growing up in Argentina and being constantly exposed to the kind of thought memes and political memes in that country. So I gave him a copy of The Market for Liberty, and his English is perfect. And he read it, and he was forced to say, yep, this is right. Just like I wasn't an ANCAP before I read that book. I read that book when I was on believe it or not, a treasure hunting expedition off the East Coast. And I read it and I said, this is so logical. I'm actually not just a libertarian, I go far beyond that. And Jorge, after he read the book, as kind of the proof of the pudding, translated it into Spanish and had it published in Argentina.
Good for him. That's fantastic.
So things like that can happen, and it's rare, but well, it's like that old Clairol commercial. One girl tells another.
All right. So this is kind of I'm not sure if this is a setting you up question, but he says, "Hey Doug, what is the basic hardwiring of women?"
I think it's different from men.
Yeah, it seems different.
It really is. I mean, they're home-oriented.
Yeah.
Men are, well, I mean, this is genetically imprinted. I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years since physically modern humans evolved,
Yeah.
I guess 200, 300,000 years ago. It's logical because women are smaller, they're not as strong. They stay at home, they hunt and gather the plants, they cook, and the men go out and hunt the animals. It's just, we're physically...
Yeah. Different. And as given the fact that they have children, and essentially they're out of commission physically for a substantial period of time during the late stages of pregnancy, but also during, the first 2 years of the child, where they're basically, connected to the child that whole time, naturally impedes their ability to be able to do the same things that the male would do. So, they had to have the biological adjustments, you would think, to that.
And they're more oriented towards children because they know for a fact that baby is theirs, but the male doesn't know for an absolute fact that the baby is his.
No.
So his commitment is not quite as strong.
Right. Yeah. I think there's some other differences, but I think a lot of these things boil down to people think about the idea of this can turn into something that's being critical of women and or critical of men, and I think both of those notions are wrong, because that's why the partnership between a man and a woman actually works really well, because a man thinks in the often in the logical, rational sense about and drawing boundaries about what's possible to achieve in the physical world, and but the woman's creative, side to do more and be bigger, and that it comes off sometimes as the pestering of the man, encourages the man to expand his world, because I think when men want peace so much, we just want peace. At the end of the day, we just want to be left alone, and we want to do interesting things that are enjoyable or whatever, but we want peace. And the woman agitates the man to kind of unsettling the peace, and encourages us to do more and accomplish more, actually. So I think it works really well together.
Well, there's other differences too that I think are genetically based. It's that, if women are staying at home and, building the hearth and so forth, they're always talking and chattering with each other. They're much more verbal than men are. When the men are out hunting, they tend to be kind of taciturn and quiet. Otherwise, you're going to scare the game away. So it's all these things are genetically imprinted in us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is an interesting thing where, what about all the LBGTQRST, et cetera, things today? Well, I've got no problem with anybody doing absolutely anything he wants with his own personal life, as long as he
doesn't hurt anyone else.
Exactly. I don't really care. In fact, I like having gay people in the neighborhood because they're neat and clean and have excellent taste.
Very creative.
Very creative. And, they're a lot of fun to hang around with sometimes. So I've got no problem with it at all. But it seems to me that it's a psychological aberration that they have to deal with. I've known gay couples, gay men. I don't know how many. I don't know any lesbian. Well, yes, I do. But there are stable homosexual couples that have
Absolutely.
been together many years, and it works out just fine. So more power to them. And if they're staying together, the state should give them the same recognition, seems to me, that they give to other people. But it's gotten out of control, where you suffer from a mild psychological aberration, and what you got to do, what a lot of these people are doing, is raising it on a flag and just purposely trying to antagonize and annoy other people. So it's a sign of the collapse of the civilization, I think.
Okay. So John from Mexico says, how's the poker games going in Punta del Este?
Well, at the farm where we are at the moment, we're about 50 minutes from, there are two casinos that I know of in Punta, and that's where they have poker games. And so, do I really want to drive 50 minutes each way to get to a poker game, which...
Maybe we can organize once we're out of quarantine, maybe start thinking about organizing maybe have a poker men's group again.
Yeah, well, maybe, because there are a lot of Americans down here that we could round up, but God, that seems like a lot of trouble.
Well, if there are people we like spending time with,
yeah,
it's okay.
If we can find some. I mean, there may be a couple of listeners in Uruguay that would like to, that are on the... We're on the Montevideo side of Uruguay here.
Punta.
Yes, excuse me, which is the non-fashionable side at this point of punta.
It's just you going against the grain again.
Well, the real estate broker absolutely insisted, you're going to love this place, you're going to love this place. I said, I don't want to go out there. And I went out here, and he was right, so.
It's a great place.
So I bought it.
All right.
Anyway, no poker at the moment.
But hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Let's see. Doug, what's your opinion on former Eastern European countries and their future? He says, my original nationality is Czech. And as you know, Czechoslovakia went through rough times in the past. The Austrian Empire was just going through 40 years of communism, etc. He said he grew up in a communist regime and 16 years ago moved to Australia. But as you can see, Australia is now a fascist state where people have no rights at all. So I made my decision to go back to take my family back to Europe to be closer to his extended family. They had to apply for permission to leave Australia to do this, and they couldn't get in without the proper papers and everything. So, I guess what are your thoughts on the future of the Czech Republic or Eastern Europe in general?
I'm not terribly thrilled with the prospects for Europe in general, but that said, it seems to me that Eastern Europe might do a lot better than Western Europe in the years to come.
Yeah.
So I don't know where you go, frankly. I mean, Australia would have seemed like a great prospect.
Totally reasonable
Yeah.
a while ago, but okay. So from Thailand, someone says there's a theory that the only two countries that are actually sovereign are ones that have square flags. Those are Switzerland and the Vatican. An interesting concept, isn't it?
Well,
Very conspiratorial.
I'm not sure it means much. I mean, there's an old saying about investing: never invest in a country that has green in its flag. And that's true. Of course, it's mostly these tropical countries that have green in their flag, and they're all backward. Okay, interesting observation. I never thought about it, but I wouldn't put too much store on it.
Do you think that Switzerland really is sovereign, meaning that it really has its own ability to control its destiny beyond its larger, its neighbors and everything else? I mean, is it really like it?
I'm a big fan of Switzerland. I really am, because for one thing, internally, they're organized by cantons, which are really very self-governing. And the Swiss national government, well, you look at the tax structure, for instance. When you pay taxes in Switzerland, and this isn't exactly accurate, but the main federal tax is a federal defense tax, about 10%. And all the Swiss pay that, and that goes for the Swiss Army and Air Force. All other taxes, income taxes and so forth, are all by the canton. And when you look to become a citizen of Switzerland, which incidentally is very hard, it takes 10 years minimum. I think it can take 20 years sometimes, because it depends on the canton. It's not a national thing, although you get a national passport, obviously. Well, it's all done locally. It's a very local thing. And another interesting thing about Switzerland, of course, is you've got 4 languages spoken there: German, French, Italian in the south, and Romansh, which is kind of the native Swiss language.
Romansh.
Yeah, it's not many Swiss even speak it anymore. They say there's about 50,000 Romansh speakers, mostly around St. Moritz. But you'd think that these 3 major linguistic groups who,
Are very different.
and they make fun of each other. They make fun of each other for all the reasons that the Germans and the French and the Italians always made fun of each other. But they get along fine. And it's a real gun culture. I mean, guns are big in Switzerland. Look, this is ancient history, but it's fun to mention ancient history sometimes. When I was going to school in Switzerland in 1967, I walked into a gun store. I hadn't seen, in 1967, I hadn't seen an AR-15 before. They had an AR-15, and I could have bought it. It was obvious to me I could have bought it because I was obviously a foreigner. So, and well, more than that, two friends of mine who they bought a Volkswagen and they drove that Volkswagen from Fribourg to Nepal. They bought a Beretta PP 380 to take with them because they thought, hey, it might be good to have some defense when we're going through Indian country. And, they bought a handgun in Switzerland. There's a couple of foreign students, okay? So this stuff used to happen. And I don't know if that's still possible in Switzerland, but, it's got a great gun culture, and listen, kind of jokes that they make in Switzerland, like a Swiss lady is walking down the street and she sees there's a beggar, and he says, "Madam, can you help me? I don't have any income." And she looks at him kind of shocked and she says, "Oh, you poor man, now you'll have to live out of capital." So I'm all for Switzerland. I love Switzerland. On the other hand, it's kind of, especially the German part, is kind of overly conservative and
You described it as constipated.
Constipated,
before.
yeah, a little bit, yeah. So, but you mind your own business. You live there, and you're fine. But you got to have money to live in Switzerland.
All right.
Unless you're a Turkish day laborer, there are a lot of foreigners in Switzerland that are just there to walk across the border and get an odd job. The labor laws for hiring people off the books to all that, I think they're much easier than they are in the U.S. So there's a lot of foreigners, but it's not a problem because those foreigners are never going to become citizens. And if there's a problem, well, hey, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
All right. Let's see here. That's good. So, do you believe Marin Katuza, Marin, friend of ours, is correct in his belief that investing in mining projects in Western countries carries little political risk?
I should have mentioned Marin's newsletter when I was mentioning the others, because I've got a lot of respect for Marin because he's technically very smart when it comes to resource stuff and businesses and stocks in general. He's really quite good technically, and also he's excellent from a street smarts point of view as well. So his stock picks are really very impressive, and I enjoy reading his letter. The economics of it are, Marin's recently gotten into, I've got a very big investment in his carbon streaming corporation, which has done very well, but it's basically on sound, but he's playing the whole carbon game and all that.
Which is real, and it's good or bad.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, hey, the money's laying on the table. Yeah, I'd like some of it. Thank you very much. So anyway, go back to the question again.
The question is, do you believe that there's little risk investing in mining in Western countries, projects in Western countries that carry little political risk?
Yeah, Marin's argument is basically you're better off in advanced Western countries where there's a rule of law, where you can actually get loans, where people will finance the deal and they don't have to worry about the Frito Bandito or the guerrillas from the jungle coming in and screwing things up. Yeah, that makes sense. On the other hand, these Western countries are getting really out of control with all their regulations and the rest of it. So I think he makes a good point, but yeah, it's a
good point.
Yeah, it's a good point.
But it could be things are shifting.
Things always are shifting, yeah. Shifting perhaps with the next election in any country. But he makes a very good point.
Okay. Let's see. Next question here. Just have a couple more, as I know we don't have much time today. With the world burning, how the hell do we remain optimistic? Where are areas you're focusing to keep your head high when the economy is being pumped with heroin and the money in our pocket is being stolen through inflation, plus all the civil liberties stuff? I'll add to that question. How do you stay positive?
Oh, psychologically positive?
Yes.
Well, as I've said before, I'm essentially a solipsist. That, of course, there are many varieties of solipsism, and I understand the problems people might have with it. But this is all a figment of my imagination. I like to think about that as one answer to the question. It's kind of all in your head. Don't take it seriously.
I think the other thing is that there's, we focus so much on the abstract things that are not in our here and now. We don't like, how upset should we get about what's happening in Australia? It's a data point, but it shouldn't depress us. I should be great. I'm grateful I'm not in Australia. I mean, it's sad. I don't like it at all. No. It's obviously awful, but it's like, does it affect me today? Not at all. And it's important to have those data points so you don't get like blindsided by something coming your way. But I think it's focusing your attention on the things that are within your control, the things that you can actually affect, is also a way to stay positive about it. Because if you're focused on the things that are abstract and outside of your control, how can you not get depressed?
Yeah, exactly. And when you watch the news too much, and you have to watch the news, otherwise you won't have some idea of what's going on around your immediate environment, you're probably going to be depressed, because it's to the interest of the reporters to, tell man-bite-dog stories. It's exciting to hear about disasters and all this type of thing. I don't know.
Okay. That's all right. So I think the biggest thing is you can do things in your world right now around you that are positive and productive. And if you should focus most of your energies there. I think that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, wait a minute. What's that old thing, the hippies that wanted to change? They said, think globally, act locally. Well, okay. There's some truth to that. I mean, there's truth to almost all these things, even the ones that say exactly the opposite.
Exactly. Think locally, act globally.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. You can build an argument for almost anything, quite frankly. I don't know. It's all a matter of psychology.
It really is. Okay. When is Doug's next book, Terrorist, expected to come out?
Well, we're actually working on it, and once we start working on it, things will evolve quickly. The thing that scares me about that book is that, first of all, events are outracing what we're writing about in the book. I mean, they really are. I mean, it's hard to keep up and be radical. Things are so crazy. The other thing is that these books are getting more radical as we go along. And I'm wondering at what point we will draw the genuine attention of the bad guys. I mean, it's not like I'm promoting terrorism in the upcoming Terrorist, although it might be said that in Assassin, we were kind of promoting assassination as a surgical method of curing some cancerous problems in society. And you should read Assassin, but I think Terrorist is going to be kind of more thrilling and even more politically incorrect.
There's a really nice compliment. He said, he adds to this question. He says, I wasn't into fiction before because I always thought my reading time would be better spent learning from nonfiction. But after listening to these conversations, he purchased all the books, and he says, I learned more about history and practical life insights from these fiction books than in many other nonfiction.
Yeah, fiction is underrated from that point of view because right now I'm reading a book by oh goodness, what's the name of this author? His heroes are Elvis Cole, private detective, and kind of like a Jack Reacher kind of book by a guy named Crace, who's apparently one of these really big best-selling fiction authors. Well, there's not too much I'm learning about that, about anything in that book, but a good fiction book has lots and lots of interesting facts and interpretations there, because there are things you can say in fiction that you best not say, perhaps, in the form of nonfiction. And when it's in fiction, you can make these things, science and history and the rest of it, interesting, as opposed to dry and factual. And so,
Right.
yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I definitely like even before I really got into reading much history, I started with historical fiction, and because it wasn't dry in the same way, and I hadn't discovered these great historians that we talked about in yesterday's episode, and so some of these historical fictions gave me a flavor of the characters, and they weren't so sanitized bullet point bibliography essentially, or biography on people, which was quite boring. So.
Anyway, thanks for the compliment. Everybody likes compliments.
Everybody likes compliments, especially my dog. Let's see here. Just a couple more questions. So as Africans swamp Europe, do you foresee mass migration out of Europe? And if so, where do you think that they'll head to?
I think they're going to go to South America. In particular, they're going to go to southern Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay and Chile. That's where I think the Europeans are going to go. Cost of living is considerably lower, and the political situation is different. But yeah, I think a lot of Europeans are going to head to South America, and maybe things will get better cyclically. Could turn around easily enough in New Zealand and Australia, and hopefully in Canada and the U.S.
Okay. What advice do you have for newcomers to the stock market, specifically those buying stocks in emerging markets like my host country of Vietnam?
Well, it's been a worldwide bull market. Of course, there's some stock markets have come down a lot, like China's, for instance. It's really tough to give. I don't follow the Vietnamese market, to tell you the truth. I don't know if it's cheap or dear right now.
Well, what's the best book to start with for just to understand stocks and companies? And is it Buffett's teacher's book?
Benjamin Graham's book, The Intelligent Investor.
Right.
Yeah, it's only about, I don't know, maybe 300 pages, so it's not like an endless tome, and it covers all the bases of fundamental analysis. It's not about how to read charts. Charts are interesting to get perspective. I always look at charts, but so I'd say The Intelligent Investor is kind of the number one book, and you want to read a book on economics as well. And I'd say the best introduction, and this is an even shorter book, 150 pages, I don't know, 200 pages at most, is Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'd start with those two books.
And avoid leverage.
Yeah, leverage is dangerous. I mean, it's sweet when you guess right.
When you get it right, but when you get it wrong,
yeah,
it can set you back a decade.
That's right. You don't want to start from square one again every time.
No. Okay, let's just do one more here, and then we'll wrap it up for today. So, Doug, which character would you most like to be or most identify with in Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged? Dagny Taggart, probably don't want to be Dagny, but Francisco d'Anconia, John Galt, Hank Rearden, or Ragnar Dansek?
Dennis Gold.
Dennis Gold, okay.
Is what
Okay.
whatever it is. Yeah, I kind of like Ragnar, frankly.
He's a pirate.
He's a pirate, but a good pirate.
Right. And he was bold, and he had long viewed, and he was loyal.
Yeah.
Trustworthy. I mean, all the fortunes of these people, he made sure he kept it in safe hands for all the people who left.
Yeah, I mean, all Rand's characters are virtuous, but it's just a question of the personality type that you like.
He seems like he's the most fun.
I think he's the most fun, too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Okay, we'll leave it at that for today then. Thank you very much, Doug. Appreciate it.